Minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hi there, this is James Valvis coming at you with a new vlog. The one I promised you, the one that would be on beauty and on the Christian artist and art. You might as well, if you plan on listening to this, sit back tight, because this is going to be a long one and it's going to involve a number of moving parts, and I truly hope that I can do it justice, that I can speak plainly and well and better than I usually do, because this topic is something I've been researching a long time, something I've been thinking about a long time, not just as an artist and not just as a Christian, but as a human being and a man and a person who appreciates art. So I've been thinking about this for years and years and years. What makes art beautiful? What is beautiful to begin with? What does that mean? How can we best achieve beauty? How can that beauty be put out in the world? This should be first and foremost in every author's and artist's mind. How can I achieve beauty? That it's not speaks to the debased culture. When those people think things like, how can I advance my political agenda through my art? Or how can I protest this? Or how can I reject the normie values of the bourgeoisie, or whatever other Marxist garbage happens to be out there? Whenever you have that, it is a retreat from the purpose, meaning, and success of art. Now, we've already talked in the earlier talk about what beauty is and why it matters. But I do want to touch on that again a little bit here. And I also want to talk about how it relates to Christianity. And I want to talk about what art is. And I want to talk about why beauty is shunned in the culture. Remember, culture is basically created by the arts. It is created and fostered by the arts. It is not created and fostered by politics. It's not created and fostered by people of regular day-to-day lives. It's not created by anything except art. Art creates and maintains culture. That's what it does. Now, while we go into, and we're going to get into Tolstoy's definition of art in a minute, but before we do that, I want to go back and talk about when I came to this understanding that I spoke of in the other talk, that even without all the evidence that there is for Christianity, and there's a boatload of it, it's not a small amount of evidence, certainly for the existence of God, but also for the Christian religion. Even without that, I would still find myself drawn to Christianity on the strength of its beauty alone. I will talk about this, especially when we get into Tolstoy a little bit. But I want you to remember that religion, the Christian religion, is beautiful. We don't talk about that very often. We don't talk about how the Sistine Chapel is beautiful, how the Cathedral of Strasbourg is beautiful, how a statue of the Virgin Mary is beautiful, that a rosary is beautiful, that a wedding in a church is beautiful, that a baptism of a child is beautiful. Beauty is strewn throughout the entire Christian faith, right up till you get to the Reformation, and then there's a turning against beauty and you start to see a slow descent into the madness of ugliness as Protestantism and later atheism takes over from the height of Christendom. But before we get into all this, I want to talk about a friend of mine. Now, a friend of mine, or at least a former friend of mine, we started talking, and he was shocked, I think, that a poet like myself was not an atheist like himself, that a poet like myself was not a flaming left-winger like himself. He was both fascinated and repulsed by this idea that somebody could be a writer of any accomplishment. And he knew that there were writers out there who claimed to be writers, but they were ridiculous. They were writing little ditties about Jesus, and they could just dismiss them out of hand because they weren't any good. When he came up to a writer like me, it was hard to do that, and he was very curious about what had gone wrong in my mind, in his mind, what had gone wrong in my mind to turn me against what he thought was clear evidence against God, Christianity, and anything resembling a dedication to tradition and traditional values, traditional morals, and traditional culture. So we started writing back and forth. And my only goal, I never wanted to convert him. I never wanted to convert anybody. It has never been my goal to convert anybody to Christianity. Now, that's somewhat of a selfish thing on my part. If I was a more caring and loving person, I would want to convert everybody to the truth. I would want them all to know the loving embrace of Christ, and I would want them all to know the beauty, peace, serenity, and hope that goes along with the Christian faith. But I'm not that way. I'm a very selfish individual. That's why I was an atheist for 20 years. And even today, now that I've converted, I find myself very, very reluctant to ever even talk about religion out loud to people. It just doesn't seem very important to me that they be saved. Now, that's not the Christian religion. The Christian religion is to love your neighbor and to love them and to try to do best by them all the time. And to love your enemy, even, and to try to do best of them. But I find that I'm a weak individual. This is why I've already spoken to this at length, that I'm a fallen man and I don't deserve to be saved. That's one of the reasons why, because I just don't wish to convert anybody. And I told him this. I have no desire to convert you, but I will go this far with you. I will show you that it is possible. It's possible to be an intellectually astute individual and yet remain a Christian. That I will show you. And so we got into it, and we got into this, and we got into that, and we talked about this, and we talked about that, and we gave each other our own bios and how we came to be in this place. And ultimately, we came onto the idea. We came onto the idea that it's a common idea that atheists throw in the face of Christians, that the only reason that you do this particular religion is that you're hoping for some payoff in the future, that you're hoping they do nice things because they're just altruistic. They don't expect any reward for it. They're just super nice people. But me, when I do something nice, I've got one eye on the cookie jar, and I'm only doing it. I'm only giving mom the kiss because I want the cookie. And that, you hear that all the time from atheists. You hear it all the time from leftists. They're altruistic. You're reward based. Your entire morality is built around hoping at the end to get something in return for it. Now, this is complete garbage when it comes to me, and I think when it comes to most Christians. I did not get into Christianity because I thought the end was going to be super. It's exactly the opposite. I believe that St. Paul, and I've talked about this as well, St. Paul said to look on your salvation with fear and trembling. St. Paul did not believe that he was going to be saved. I've said this before. He was the second most important person in Christianity behind Christ. It's either him or the Virgin Mary. One of those two people. Give him a tie. Tied for second, the most important person. And he was not sure of his own salvation. So if St. Paul was not sure, I better not be sure myself. So the idea that somehow I'm doing this for a reward in the future, when for all I know, heaven could be all but empty, and everybody else is locked out, is a foolish idea. It's just a foolish idea. I mean, it is possible that you can get to heaven through the mercy of Christ, and to some degree, that is a hope. That is one of the hopes of Christianity, is that you will be saved in that way, that you will not you will not be extinguished into oblivion and annihilation. That's a hope, but it's not. There's not any promise of that, even if you're a Christian. I mean, if you read Dante's Inferno, you see he throws all kinds of people in hell. He throws popes in hell, and priests in hell, and little, just regular people, and adulterers, and anybody else. All, all the sins that I ever did, they're all inhabiting the Inferno. And so, you hope for that, but it's not what what drew me to Christianity. In fact, I always thought, and I still think, that there's a better chance that I end up in the other place than in the better place. And it's just, that's just the way it is. Now, I want to read you this excerpt from the letter because it transitions into beauty. Because I say, not only did I convert to Christianity not because I wanted a reward, I converted because there was truth in it, because I saw the truth of it. And then on top of that, I saw the beauty. So let me read this excerpt of the letter that I wrote to him a couple of years back now. And so you mention the afterlife and what happens, and it may surprise you to know I don't know what happens. Heaven has always been a vague doctrine. Even Jesus doesn't define it too much. We have more of an understanding of hell by far. Now I'm going to say something a little scandalous, or at least surprising to those who think the reward is the whole point of Christian belief. I never got into the Christianity gig for the payoff at the end. Sure, I would like to hear him say at the end, "Job well done, my faithful servant," and all that. But I believe my conversion was founded instead on two pillars, both equally strong. One, that Christianity is true, and two, that Christianity is beautiful. Truth and beauty, forever married, thanks to Keats. In the essay, and in the previous letters, we talked about the first part, but now I want to speak on the second a little, the beauty part. I admit I find most of modernity ugly, and that includes most of its art, values, and politics. Maybe you think something like The Bed by Tracy Emin and see beauty. Maybe you look at that and see beauty. Maybe you think a whip stuck up someone's ass or a crucifix placed in urine is lovely, but I do not. Do not misunderstand. I'm not offended by these, nor am I shaken or agitated. I'm not. I hung out with artists who did more outrageous things. I just think they're gross and pointless. They're both ugly and boring. Pornography as literature doesn't interest me either. It's ugly and boring. Back when I was stationed in the Army and stationed at Fort Sheridan outside Chicago, I used to spend my Saturdays in the Chicago museums. I was more drawn to the Field Museum because I loved natural science and history. Their precious gem display is maybe my favorite permanent exhibit of all time. And it really is. I'm just cutting in here. If you ever get into Chicago and you go to the Field Museum, go to the gem display. It's just absolutely stunning. It's wonderful. Okay, I'm going on now. But I also spent a lot of time in the Art Institute. Even as a devout atheist, I was drawn not to the modern art wing, which mostly annoyed me with its scribbles and paint dribblings, and even the more interesting Cubism, say, or Chagall's White Crucifix, which I believe the present Pope, St. Francis, has called his famous painting, another thing I disagree with him about. It's not even the best work by Chagall in the building, which is Chagall's windows. Even artists I love, like Van Gogh and Hopper, even masterpieces like The Rock by Peter Bloom, which I always make sure I see, usually being ignored because he sits adjacent to Hopper's Nighthawks, and American Gothic by Grant Wood, do not draw me like the monumental, towering Christian paintings and sculptures of the art when Christianity was at its peak. If you make the mistake of going to see these paintings first, then even an artist as luminous as Vermeer will seem paltry by comparison. A Georgia O'Keeffe will seem almost ridiculous. And once you get to Twombly or Rothko, there isn't anything but disgust that we have sunk to this level. Not just that our artists have become so slight by comparison, but that we have lionized them as superior and profound. We see in literature also where books by Byron and Hopkins collect dust on the shelf while second-raters earn thousands of readers for having no talent other than to inspire guilt over past racial crimes. Any world in which Poe dies penniless and a shithead like Dan Brown rakes in millions is not one that has its head screwed on right. But in any case, if the movement away from Christianity was a good one, we would expect things not to become less and less beautiful, but in fact expect it to be the reverse. A great explosion of truth and beauty should be raining down upon us. Instead, we see almost a reverse movie, where instead of art improving, as one might expect, it devolves and goes from Michelangelo to Warhol, Shakespeare as popular culture to 50 Shades of Grey as popular culture. Instead, we have this world that more and more slips into an Orwellian dystopia where our artists are either all say the same party line or say nothing at all. Hiding behind abstraction is a way to mask their moral and aesthetic confusion, their abandonment of truth, their rejection of beauty. So what I'm getting at here is that the Christian faith not only appeals to me on an intellectual level, but also on an aesthetic level. I love the beauty of it, the grandeur, and the history, which is more than the Crusades and Inquisition, misunderstood though they are, we usually get in our perverse and distorted culture. And here's the kicker. I think this latter level would be enough to sustain me even as a Christian, even if I felt the former was suspect or wanting. I don't feel that way, but I'm just making the point. Remember, I think faith is a choice, and I would choose Da Vinci over de Kooning any day. We started these conversations as a way of me showing you what a person like me thinks and why he thinks it. And I think this is part of it. I could not be removed from my spot because I find it more beautiful. I find it more beautiful to defend a helpless child in the womb than I do to suction it into pieces. I find it more beautiful to see a person die a natural death than to be pushed out by relatives anxious over finances and wanting to get on with their lives. I find it more beautiful to have a lifelong commitment and relationship to one person that grows and deepens over decades, to a weekend wife-swapping session or an office hookup culture. If you're going to insist truth is unknowable, then every choice is an aesthetic one. And I look at the vast shallowness and faithlessness and callousness of modernity. I got a good mouthful of that in my 20s. And I decided, even before I converted, I deplored it. It was ugly, and worse, it loved its ugliness. Look at the Women's March, where women walk around dressed as vaginas. Look at all those Facebook memes where every vice is celebrated and every poor attitude glorified, people bragging about being bitches and whatnot. Look at the slovenliness of a Lena Dunham, the vulgarity of a Miley Cyrus, the stupidity of a Madonna. The thing is, I mention these women not because they're women, or even the worst, but because they are enormously successful people who have already acquired generational wealth. They don't need to be vulgar or hateful or offer to blow people to vote for Hillary. There is something instead sick within them, an ugliness festering as much out of their artistic choices as their moral vacuity. Now, a person might counter this with some creepy Christian guy, possibly in history or whatever, But I'd argue these people are exceptions and anathema to their own creeds and beliefs, whereas the modern nun, in quotes, who has thrown off the last vestiges of Christianity, is what he or she is because she or he is a direct result of those beliefs. He or she is not acting contrary to his principles, but in accord with them, or the utter lack of them. And so, let's unpack this just a little bit. What I'm saying here, what I mean is that beauty tilts everything back toward the traditional. When we look at the modern and we look at the traditional and we say, we don't know the truth. Let's just say, let's start there. We don't know what the truth is. We turn immediately to Christ, and what does Christ say? Now, this is not just, he's not just an authority here, but he says something very profound, and just even to think of him as a wise guy, and I mean by wise, not a gangster Jesus, but a wise man who's just saying the truth. And he says, by their fruits you shall know them. Think about that. Now, this is Jesus saying this back in 30, AD or somewhere in that area. And he was already telling people, look, in 2018, you can tell which is good and which is bad, which is true and which is false, by what they produce. If they produce pornography, they are not good. If they produce lies, they are not true. If they produce ugliness, they are not beautiful. And if they produce lies, evil, and ugliness, as most of modernity does, as most of the secular culture now does, then what does it say about that culture? What does it say? You ask me why I would be a Christian. And I would say, even without any evidence at all that Jesus Christ was God, I would still rather be a Christian than anything else. Because I look out at the world, and I can see some beauty here and some beauty there. There's always shadow beauty in everything. But when I see Christianity, I see great beautiness, great beauty. Everything about it shines in beauty. And the reason why something like a pedophile priest is so horrendous is because it crushes that beauty. It is absolutely. Don't we expect some piece of garbage, postmodernist Jeffrey Dahmer type to go around, molesting people? Don't we expect that of just people who just throw off all tradition and culture? We just expect it. That's why you never call these people hypocrites. Now, you could call Jeffrey Dahmer every name in the book. Well, what you can't call him is a hypocrite. Why? Because he doesn't stand for truth. He doesn't stand for good. He doesn't stand for beauty. He never did. So, this is what I became after my conversion. But I didn't start out there. I started out as a good leftist. I started out as a good postmodernist. My entire thinking was as polluted as anybody's. I have poems to prove it. I'm going to read you one. I'm going to read you a poem that appeared in my book, How to Say Goodbye. And it was written early in my 20s, and it shows the hopelessness and the ugliness of the whole postmodern mindset. It lives in complete ingratitude for everything, and it is an anti-life mindset. So let me read this to you. This is where I start out. This is before my conversion. Now, I want you to notice that there's skill involved in this poem. There's a lot of skill, but it is a debased piece of art. I put it in my book. I would have probably put it first in my book. And the reason why is because I would have wanted to show how I'm progressing out of that. There's there's an arc to my work. And in the arc, it starts out very dark and self-pitying and defeatist and postmodernist. And as I get older and I get smarter and then I convert, I change. I literally become born a second time. I change completely. Let me read this poem, and you can see both its talent and its utter despair. A note to the unborn. It will be a dirty spoon, a dog pissing on your begonias, traffic court, a little boy tugging on your pant leg and then kicking you. It will be no oil in the car, a rip in your favorite shirt, beer at 6 a.m., the electricity shut off and you on the phone with your girlfriend saying goodbye. It will be your first day of school and not knowing the answer, a cigarette lit the wrong way, head lice, 3 miles to the nearest laundromat. It will be bad poetry written by fools and foolish poetry written by bad people, a broken leg. It will be your father raping your mother as you try to break down the door, green teeth, photographs that don't turn out. It will be the day at work when you know they're going to fire you. Your sister pregnant at 13, phlegm rags left on the table while you try to eat runny eggs. It will be the radio telling you to come home and do nothing, just tune into the television. It will be false laughter. It will be a condom every time you fuck, the air polluted, the sea polluted, the body's polluted, the drive-by 6 shooting and 6 dead. It will be your back hurting as you do the job, tears forming beneath bewildered eyes, stale bread. There will be no health insurance, and then no doctor who'll take your insurance, and then no health. Are you sure you want this? It will be skin cancer, your wife disappearing for 2 weeks, prostitutes with razor blades, the French. It will be your friends hitting you up, then knocking you down. It will be painful urination, bloody discharges, private executions, public self-destruction. It will be the rats, the cold walls that know your name, a constant general feeling things are wrong. It will be 60 pounds overweight. It will be just you, alone, no more protection from the void of nothingness until you're screaming death. Punk rock music, simple-minded intellectuals, nuclear weapons, somebody microwaving a kitten, and everybody telling you to lighten up. It's so depressing. So that's joyful, huh? That just fills you with it just fills you up with a great will to go on and to be lifted up and to feel the great gift of life. No, this is a complete postmodern poem. It's a complete postmodern mindset. People sometimes don't believe me when I tell them that I was an atheist, and I always say you should read some of my poems, because if you read my poems, you'll know they're there. Christian's not writing that poem, not ever. And you might say that a Christian's poem is vapid or something, chicken soup with a soul garbage, but there's a vapidity to that poem as well. It's not a complete honest poem. It's not. Life is, this is where the Buddhists get it wrong. All life is suffering. Well, yes, there's suffering in life, but is all life suffering? All of it? Is that all it is suffering? So they're wrong. They're wrong. It's not all suffering. So it's a diseased outlook, and I had it bad, and it really took me getting knocked on my ass, being homeless 3 times, and having just about everybody turn on me, and being dumped by my wife, and then dumped by my girlfriend, and dumped by friends, and dumped by family, for me to just say, you know what, maybe something is wrong with the way not only I'm thinking, but the way they're thinking. And so that's where I came to and came out of. And I don't want it just to focus on me here, but I do want to focus on the fact that beauty doesn't descend into that kind of postmodern madness. We see this over and over again in art, that there's a certain unrelenting negativity to modern art, and it's because it's so defeatist. There's no hope in it. There's no hope in it, and where there's no hope, there's no real art. And that brings me to our friend Mr. Tolstoy. Now, I often call when I speak of Tolstoy, I say Tolstoy is the maestro. I believe that Tolstoy is probably the summit of human art. It is almost impossible to conceive of an artist who would be more accomplished than Tolstoy. I know people say Shakespeare. Shakespeare is a great artist. There's no denying that. There's nobody who can ever deny that. To me, Tolstoy is better. Tolstoy is everything you can imagine an artist can be, and then throw on a couple more gold bars. He is absolutely stunning. I've read his books that I've read, several times. I've not yet read War and Peace and Anna Karenina. They just seem really, really large. And maybe after I get done reading them, I'll feel differently about it, but I rather doubt it. I almost don't feel worthy to read those books. That's how I've read enough of Tolstoy and the death of Ivan Ilyich and the and then what I'm going to be accepting here, like What is Art, which I think is one of the is the greatest book ever written. Period. End of story on art. And it should be read in every classroom all across this country every year, in every college classroom at least. If you're taking a creative writing class, you should be forced to read this. Somebody should hold your head in front of the book until you're done turning pages. That's how important this book is. I've read it 7 or 8 times, and I just came across it like 4 years ago. It is absolutely stunning. Almost every line in it. I don't agree with every single thing in there. I think sometimes he's a little too optimistic about what's going to happen in the future. He does not see he doesn't see the Soviet Union coming in his own country. He's not able to see that, nor is he able to see the collapse of the Christian worldview the way it's happened in modernity. The attack, the multiple heresies that attack it on many levels. He's not able to see all that. So what he thinks he sees is a progression toward a greater and greater artistic understanding. But what he doesn't realize is that he's the summit of it. He's the summit. It doesn't get any better than Tolstoy. He thinks it's going to. He thinks it's going to come out of him, and then it's going to go on. But right after him, what happens? The atheists take over Russia, and it all stops. It all stops. You got Gogol, Turgenev, Chekhov, Dostoevsky, and Tolstoy. 5 of the greatest geniuses who ever lived. They knew each other. They were friends with each other. They were all in the same, St. Petersburg, and that they were all there. And they knew of each other. They read each other. These are monumental figures, and they were all there. And then the tap gets shut off. The tap absolutely gets shut off, and there is almost nothing until you get to Solzhenitsyn in I guess the 70s he was writing, or whenever it was that he put out his first books, and then the Gulag Archipelago and that kind of thing. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. But he thinks that the summit is there in Christianity, and let me talk about why he thinks that, because I have a couple of excerpts here in What is Art. And first, let me give you his definition of art, because his definition of art will show you just how morally bankrupt the academic art is in this country and across the Western world currently. Because whenever you read something and you say, gee, I don't get that, I don't feel anything from it, and it's just confusing, and I'm confused, and I don't feel good, and it makes me feel kind of sick to my stomach, but otherwise it's just what is the writer trying to say here? Why are they lecturing me so severely? All that stuff, put it against this definition of art. And Tolstoy says art is a human, this is his definition, this is his exact quote, art is a human activity consisting in this, that one man or woman, I'm adding the or woman, one man consciously, by means of certain external signs, hands on to others feelings he has lived through, and that others are infected by these feelings and also experience them. That's his whole definition of art. It is simply through signs and symbols, music, painting, words, transmitting feelings from one person to another. So if I feel angry, and I transfer that in a poem, I'm creating art. However, if I'm doing all this tutti frutti stuff where it's just intellectual word soup, that's not art. Just gibberish. It's not art at all. And also, it's not beautiful. We only really find beauty in art in this definition. He goes on to say that art must be accessible to everybody. That there is no difference. If you cannot understand the art, if it's not accessible to you, if there's no such thing as refined art where you have to have X, Y, and Z degree to get it. If you have to have X, Y, and Z degree to understand the art, it's not art. Okay, it's an intellectual puzzle or something, but it's not art. Art transmits a feeling, and if you don't feel that feeling, if you don't have the feelings, so I always try to tell younger writers, you have to work from a feeling. Whatever made you feel something, that is the beauty. That will come through the art. You have to go back into your life and find out what makes you feel, and that is your story idea. And it doesn't matter what it is, just as long as you felt deeply and felt truly. You have to be honest. You can't be like, oh, I know I'm supposed to feel a lot of love for my mother, and so I'm going to write a poem about how much I love her, but deep down you hate your mother. You will not write good art. You will not produce good art because you're not being honest. You're not being honest. It has to be an honest emotion, and then you have to transfer that honest emotion to another human being, and it has to be accessible to them, and it has to be accessible on some level, not high up on the education level. I mean, I guess if a person is retarded, and yes, I still use that word retarded in a clinical sense. If a person is retarded, if they have mental retardation, then I don't think that you have to be accessible to them. But if they have a standard intellect, something over, say, 90 IQ points, then yeah, you should be able to reach them through your art. Let me read the second part, because he gets into the Christianity part of it here. And it's important to understand that in some ways Tolstoy was a radical Christian. He was a radical Christian. He didn't really like organized religion much, but he was a very radical Christian. He really believed in the brotherhood of man, and that was the thing that he felt was the most important understanding that religion passed on to anybody. And he found its optimal and its most perfect expression in Christianity. Okay? So he says, the art of our time should be appraised differently from former art, chiefly in this, that the art of our time, i.e. Christian art, basing itself on the religious perception which demands the union of man, or the brotherhood of man, excludes from the domain of art good in subject matter everything transmitting exclusive feelings which do not unite but divide men. It relegates such work to the category of art bad in its subject matter, while on the other hand it includes in the category of art good in subject matter of a section not formally admitted to deserve to be chosen out and respected, namely universal art, transmitting even the most trifling and simple feelings, if only they are accessible to all men without exception, and therefore unite them. Such art cannot in our time but be esteemed good, for it attains the end which the religious perception of our time, i.e. Christianity, sets before humanity. Christian art either evokes in men those feelings which, through love of God and of one's neighbor, draw them to greater and ever greater union, and makes them ready for and capable of such union, or evokes in them those feelings which show them they are already united in the joys and sorrows of life. And therefore the Christian art of our time can be and is of two kinds. 1. Art transmitting feelings flowing from the religious perception of man's position in the world in relation to God and to his neighbor. Religious art in the limitation meaning of the term. And 2. Art transmitting the simplest feelings of life, of common life, such as always as are accessible to all men in the whole world. The religious perception of our time, which consists in acknowledging that the aim of life, both collective and individual, is the union of mankind, is already so sufficiently distinct that people have now only to reject the false theory of beauty according to which enjoyment is considered to be the purpose of art, and religious perception will naturally take its place as the guide of the art of our time. Now, when he's arguing against beauty there, what he's arguing against is beauty for beauty's sake. Remember, you had art for art's sake going on there at that time. And so he's talking about that, where a thing would be considered great art without any kind of justification or any kind of moral underpinning of that art. So if he's not talking about beauty in the sense that it's connected to good and the true. He's talking about beauty for its sake alone, which is a prurient view of beauty. But that's what he's saying here. Basically, what he's saying is that you need, let's unpack it. You need the religious perception, which is that all men are created in a union, and that we are connected in this way through art. In other words, art needs to either show or bring about the union, the brotherhood of man. If it doesn't do that, it is not good art. It's not. It's a failure. If it does anything but that, it's a failure. It is not beautiful if it doesn't do that. Now, there used to be a time when he goes on to say this earlier, there used to be a time when it was possible to have art that did not bring about the brotherhood of man. I'll give you an example. Beowulf. Beowulf is a story that doesn't bring about the brotherhood of man, but it's a heroic adventure in which, the hero goes out and he does these great feats. But he's not bringing about the brotherhood of man or something like that. What Tolstoy is saying is that after Christianity comes along, you can't go back to that and have it be great art. You can't. That beauty has been changed. That the religious perception becomes paramount. And that all art must in some way bring people together in the brotherhood of man. And without it, it's not beautiful art. It's not good art. It's not true art. Something fundamentally changed with Christianity, and we can't go back in the same way that we can't go back to worshiping little statues that you put over the hearth. I mean, you could do that, but then anybody who's moved beyond that, anybody who's got a higher level of understanding of what religious understanding, anybody who has that will look at that person as barbaric, as an anachronism. They cannot. You look at them and you think they're pathetic. That their understanding of religion is debased. You know that statue is not divine. You know that. And it's not just from scientific understanding. We know it philosophically that it's not divine. And so we're a little afield of beauty. But what I want to get across is that this brotherhood of man in Tolstoy speaks to beauty. It speaks to, we are not seeing that in modern art. When I read to you Notes to the Unborn, does that in any way promote the brotherhood of man? Does it make you feel closer to your fellow man? Does it make you feel closer to God? Does it make you feel anything but disgust? And so we have to understand that this is going on, that there's a failure out there. And when you see all this PC garbage and all these people and the feminists and all the people who balkanize people against each other, the evil white men or artists who are constantly saying, oh, these horrible colonials, oh, these horrible white people, oh, these horrible straight people, oh, these horrible Christians, oh, these or turn around, Muslims or anybody else. Whenever you get that, you are not dealing anymore with the religious perception that Tolstoy says is now necessary to create beauty. Art is beauty. It is functionally beauty. That's what it means. You cannot have art, ugly art. It's a contradiction. It's an oxymoron. And so if you do not have the Christian perception of art, which is it advances human understanding between peoples and the brotherhood of man, if you don't have that, you don't have beauty. You don't even have art. You have at best bad art, or you have art that goes back in time and is primitive. A horror movie, for instance, is primitive art. Doesn't advance man. It's just thrills and trying to survive. It's a throwback from it's a throwback to a primitive time, and we know that. That's why we don't see that as art that edifies us. That's why we forget it 10 minutes after it's over. Okay, now I want to transition here from Tolstoy to C.S. Lewis. Now, C.S. Lewis is the second greatest thinker in the 20th century. The first greatest thinker was G.K. Chesterton. And Chesterton was the greatest thinker because C.S. Lewis stole all of Chesterton's stuff and rewrote it. Really, there's a lot of similarities between these two men. But Lewis has his own style and his own way of going about it. But he says a lot of the same stuff, and you could tell that he's greatly influenced by Chesterton. And I want to get into what I'm talking about here in this, and what I think is the greatest essay written in the 20th century. And it's called Screwtape Offers a Toast. And I'm going to read it to you. And while I'm reading it to you, I want you to think about how art has been. We often talk about the democratization of art as a good thing. We say, yay, more people are doing art, yay. But, and if somebody says, you know what, we should have higher standards for art, we call that person an elitist, or we call that person stuck up, or we call that person a highbrow, or we call that person something else. And I'm not talking about, the academic who tries to make art so pretentious that nobody can understand it. But I'm talking about the art where, let me put it this way, we've all seen on Facebook where the extremely homely woman is told by all her friends how beautiful she is. Now that's a lie. She's not beautiful. There are objective standards of beauty, and she's not beautiful. Now we know why that person is doing it, because it's nice and polite and civil. But when we start doing it with art, when we start saying ugly art is beautiful, then everything in the culture becomes perverse. Everything. And so this is what Lewis is talking about here. So let me read it. And he says, and of course it is connected, we're talking about the word democracy, and of course it is connected with the political ideal that men should be equally treated. You then make a stealthy transition in the minds from this political ideal to the factual belief that all men are equal, especially the man you are working on. He's a demon trying to get people to go to hell, so he's talking about how he can how he can get them to go to hell, especially the demon is working on a man, especially the man you are working on. As a result, you can use the word democracy to sanction in his thought the most degrading and also the least enjoyable of all human feelings. You can get him to practice, not only without shame, but with a positive glow of self-approval, conduct which, if undefended by the magic word of democracy, would be universally derided. This feeling, I mean, is of course that which prompts a man to say, I'm as good as you. The first and most obvious advantage is that you thus induce him to enthrone at the center of his life a good, solid, resounding lie. I don't mean merely that his statement is false in fact. that he is no more equal to everyone he meets in kindness, honesty, and good sense than in height or waist measurement. I mean that he does not believe it himself. No man who says, I'm as good as you, believes it. He would not say it if he did. The Saint Bernard never says it to the toy dog, nor the scholar to the dunce, nor the employable to the bum, nor the pretty woman to the plain. The claim to equality outside the strictly political field is made only by those who feel themselves in some way inferior. What it expresses is precisely the itching, smarting, writhing awareness of an inferiority which the patient refuses to accept, and therefore resents. Yes, and therefore resents every kind of authority and superiority in others, denigrates it, wishes its annihilation. Presently he suspects every mere difference of becoming a claim of superiority. No one must be different from himself in voice, clothes, manners, recreation, choice of food. Here is someone who speaks English rather more clearly and euphoniously than I. It must be a vile, upstaged, la-di-da affectation. Here is a fellow who says he doesn't like hot dogs, thinks himself too good for them, no doubt. Here is a man who doesn't turn on the jukebox. He's one of those goddamn highbrows and is doing it to show off. If they were honest to God, all right Joes, they'd be like me. They've no business being different. It's undemocratic. Okay, so what Lewis is saying here, what he means is that there has become in society a dumbing down of how we can appreciate superiority. And this superiority is not just intellectual superiority, but it is superiority when it comes to morals, when it comes to, the good, the true, and the beautiful. There's a reason there's a fat acceptance movement now when there never was before. Now, we all know that fat is not attractive. And we all know that you can put a thousand fat girls on the cover of Vogue, and it's not going to mean that she's as pretty as a girl who's trim and slender. It's just not going to happen. It's objectively untrue. And the idea that we need to dumb down beauty because some people are not beautiful is itself a really bad idea. Now, I say that not being the most handsome guy in the world. I'm overweight. I've never been that attractive. My teeth are terrible. But listen, the idea that, I'm not going to sit here and say that I look as good as, Brad Pitt or something. I just don't. That's the honest fact of the matter. And when it comes to art, and when it comes to Christian art, the fact that you threw something together and here's something we have going on a lot now. I mean, you see all these tattoos, you see all these piercings, you see these people making themselves into lizard people. You have these people sticking bones through their faces. Why do you think they're doing that? Do you think it's because that's a thing they wanted, they are doing it because they are rejecting beauty. It's just that simple. It's not that they think that's aesthetically pleasing. They know it's not aesthetically pleasing. They do it because they are saying there is a standard of beauty out there and I can't meet it, so fuck your standard of beauty. That's what they're saying. That's what it means. And now the whole culture is like that. The whole culture, as it turns away from Christianity and what Tolstoy talked about in the brotherhood of man, and what Lewis talks about here as in the superiority of beauty, as it turns away from that, we get more and more ugly, more and more debased, more and more despondent, and more suicidal. People are killing themselves left and right. Across the board, young people, old people, men and women, especially women. We're seeing all kinds of despair. If we were really, like I said in the letter, if we were really advancing as a civilization, the more we got rid of Christianity, we wouldn't be seeing more suicides. We'd be seeing fewer and fewer and fewer. People would want to live in this great utopia that we've built. But that's not what we see at all. And the problem isn't capitalism. The problem isn't that we have too much stuff. The problem isn't electronics. The problem is in philosophy. It is a rejection of beauty. It is art turning against what Tolstoy calls the religious sentiment of the brotherhood of man and of the basic goodness of God and life. And as we get further and further away from that understanding, we don't become better people. We become more and more sad and ugly and defeated. Walk through any museum. Start at the earliest cave drawings, the pottery. Go to any nation or any culture, any one of them, the Chinese, the African nations, the earliest Incas, and work your way forward through the great cultures, to the Greeks and the Romans, and the Jews and the Egyptians, all of them building up this great, wonderful beauty. And then through the medieval years, and the great Gothic art, and the great Gothic architecture, and the great cathedrals that rise into the air and are stunning in their beauty and their majesty. And then on to Shakespeare and Chaucer and all the wonderful works of England and Renaissance Italy and France and Spain. And then into even America in the time of the great independent voice. And all the way up till about, well, Friedrich Nietzsche. And even Nietzsche had enough left over for some beauty of his own. But now, you go to a gallery, and what do you see? Somebody pissing in a bottle? And that's art. Everywhere we go, we see ugliness. Go look at the EMT and EMP Experience Music Project in Seattle. It looks like a building that was melted in a toaster. And that's supposed to be beautiful. Go to any art exhibit from a modern artist, and you'll see stuff that doesn't ever enrich. It just provokes. It just tries to anger or disgust. It tries to be new. People don't even read poetry anymore. It doesn't say anything to them. You don't feel anything when you read it. It's like an intellectual exercise of just words thrown together. All of movies, the great American art form. We've gone from Citizen Kane and Casablanca to endless strings of monster movies and Marvel movies. Where is the beauty? The only way we get the beauty back, the only way we save ourselves from despair, is to go backwards. Go backwards to what Tolstoy called the religious perception that was best manifested in Christianity. I know from my own personal experience, from my own personal life, that the moment that I did that, everything became beautiful. Thank you for listening to this talk. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share this discussion on beauty and the Christian artists. And as always, especially, always remember this. God bless you.